Welcome to this special episode of Talk Commerce
Tech Edition.
Welcome to Talk Commerce, a Tech Edition special where we talk about how merchants, agencies, and developers experience commerce. This week we interview Jisse Reitsma with Urio. We focus on developer training on React, Vue, or the new Magento Hyva theme. We look at training from the merchant, agency, and developer perspectives. Jisse gives us actionable feedback for training on what to ask as a developer, what an agency should be looking for in a developer, and what a merchant should expect from their agency. We talk about how open source is not free and close it out with a little bit of Hyva and more mispronunciations. Magento Creative, partnering with the client to help fulfill their strategic growth, serving the world as an Adobe Gold partner and BigCommerce Elite partner. Magento, the code of commerce. This episode is sponsored by eWay Corporation, the partner of choice for technology, infrastructure, and enterprise-level digital solutions. An AWS Select Consulting partner, eWay Corporation, forward together. My name is Brent Peterson, and I'm your host. Please remember to subscribe wherever you download your podcasts. And now, Talk Commerce.
Welcome to Talk Commerce, and I have Jisse with me today.
Are we going to spend 5 minutes or 10 minutes
No.
on this?
Please introduce yourself.
So this is Talk Commerce with Brent.
However you want to say it.
Okay.
Bronco, Brontosaurus.
Brontosaurus, the Brontosaurus, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm Jisse.
Great. Today we're going to talk a little bit about training in not just Adobe, but across some other platforms as well. Maybe touch on a little bit of React. Yeah, it's going to be this is going to be a tech talk, and I'm going to have some awesome new music. I found some metal music, but Jisse is going to kind of dictate
the piano.
I think it's up to you to dictate what you would like to have for some intro music on this episode.
Rammstein.
So I was thinking,
obviously.
I want to do some training now. Let's all train now.
That's not heavy metal. I don't know what kind of music that is, but
heavy metal for Beethoven.
Yeah. I'm actually playing a lot of Chopin lately on the piano.
All right, yeah.
I still intend to let people in the community know how that sounds like, because it's okay-ish. I'm not a professional on the piano, but at least it's a beautiful sound that I can get out of it.
Yeah, well, Chopin is very challenging.
Well, so some songs are actually pretty okay, but I don't know about the numbers or like the official namings of those songs that I can play. But there's two of them pretty challenging, and every time when I take a new one, it's going to take me about 2 months or so before I can play it in a solid way. But I like the challenge.
All right, well, let's. I wonder if Chopin does a duet. We should look that up.
With
you and I. We could do one together, virtually.
Do you play piano?
I do, yes.
Cool. Then we should do the next Talk Commerce with an intro on the piano both.
Absolutely.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah, and then we could do another one with Madeline. You know, Madeline was trained in opera, so...
I've heard that. Yeah, exactly. And what does Susan do?
Susan plays a little piano and sings in the church choir.
So we put a band together.
Yeah, and Gavin plays bass and guitar and piano.
So that's the Brent band.
The Gavin band. Gavin's actually on Spotify. So Gavin actually is a real... Well, no, Madeline's also a real musician. What am I saying? Now I'm going to get in trouble.
Oh, yeah. So, training. To make it easier for ourselves.
Yeah. So Urio, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Is primarily a training organization. Would you say that?
Yeah. I'm actually a little bit in doubt already for years whether I should call Yirio an organization or just call it what it is, a one-man company, which is me. So I've been doing I've been pushing trainings for some time, and I'm pretty happy actually to say also that I've been doing training as using it as a primary income for 3 or 4 years now, and primary income means that I'm making like 90% of my income out of training. So yeah, and I'm still doing a couple of other things on the side, like organizing events like Reacticon, or doing a couple of extensions that I'm still selling online. But that's the smallish stuff indeed. But yeah, training, yeah.
Okay, good. So this is going to be more of a developer-focused podcast. So let's just speak right to why developers should get trained on the certain platforms that they're looking at. And I think the big one for Adobe is PWA Studio.
Yeah.
So let's dive right into PWA Studio, and like, why would a developer need to learn React or?
Okay, so we're making this oriented towards developers, right? So we can forget about the sales pitch. We can stop talking nonsense. We can be direct and just honest and open. So personally, right away, I would say that PWA Studio is not for everyone. I've been picking up on a vibe in the community as well, that a lot of people think that PWA Studio is maybe even a waste of money, time, resources, and etc. And I totally disagree with them. Simply because, well, some people like the original Magento 1 front end. Some people like Magento 2 front end, despite of its issues. Some others like React, some others like Vue. So I personally think that there's something for everyone out there. That's kind of also like the reality at this moment, that we're not talking about a single front end anymore with Magento, but multiple front ends. And there's a reason for that, basically because we're all different. So that's one of my key points always towards like, well, what is the choice there to make? Yeah, it simply depends.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, the conversations around headless and where commerce is going. I had an interesting talk with a newer platform, or maybe it's not newer, but it's called Ultra Commerce, and they have an API first mentality, microservices, but they also have a front end that comes with it, so you don't have to deploy without a front end. And one of their arguments is that it reduces the cost if you do have a bundled front end in it. And it expands the cost and the cost and the complexity when you remove the front end and make somebody build a front end and then attach it via APIs.
Yeah. Well, I think like the cost part is again also something that simply depends upon how well you're doing, or what kind of knowledge level you already have. So, for instance, a lot of people have been complaining about knockout and require in the current Luma front end. However, if you're a knockout require expert, you're not finding that many things difficult in there. Maybe there's a lot of complexity still in there, but that's basically also because it's Magento. However, I think that the level of complexity actually depends upon the level of knowledge that you have about that technology. So when it comes to reducing costs, it's also depending on the developers involved and whether they can make it a success or not. Which is also kind of like the difficulty why I started also with saying that PW Studio might not be for everyone. I've heard a lot of developers and a lot of agencies dive into PWA Studio because it's the next thing. And then suddenly they're disappointed with everything being different. And suddenly that all of their knowledge with being a Magento 1 developer or a Magento 2 developer is basically worth nothing because they need to invest into React and all of its different variations. From that, what I find actually, and it's pretty funny. I've taught a couple of people also how to use PWA Studio, and I've taught it to. I've trained a couple of React developers, and they found actually whatever PWA Studio came up with. So the Venya UI theme, the Peregrine component library. They found it easy stuff. Once I start explaining the backgrounds. They simply just not like, oh, but I can build the same thing, and now I don't need to build it because Magento is already providing the functions and the components and the hooks and so on. And then they simply just realize like, oh, but this is just another React implementation. So within a couple of weeks' time, we're up to date on that. Within a couple of weeks or a couple of months' time, we finished off the first project. Compare that to a Magento 2 developer that never really got the hang of scripting in JavaScript. Then suddenly React is just totally totally complex and just a real challenge. And maybe that challenge is something that is never conquered. Like, what do you do with the challenges? You conquer the challenge, right? But basically, I think it's depending upon where you came from, where you're coming from, whether React is your thing or not. And that's still the hard story that Magento at Adobe is selling as well. They're trying to promote not necessarily PWA Studio as being the next thing. They're trying to promote headless as being the next thing with the GraphQL API in the center. But a lot of us are simply expecting also Magento to solve that puzzle for the front end again. And therefore, PWA Studio is the best thing to do, to embrace. And then suddenly we're surprised to find that it's a little bit more complicated than the old front end. And I maybe should add quotes in there because maybe it's not always that complicated. It's complicated in a different way.
Yeah, and as I said that, I thought to myself, well, the complication is in the fact that people aren't familiar with the solution and maybe all the parts of the solution aren't there yet. But if you think of it as Magento as a back end without having to touch it and APIs that would attach at the front end, theoretically, all you have to do is launch a front end and leave the back end sitting there. So really, the complexity is only in the complexity of the person thinking about the complexity. And maybe
exactly.
It's not as complex as everybody thinks.
Well, and last year in October, I organized Reacticon number 3, and then actually a guy stood up, Carlos. I needed to look up his last name, Cabrera, and Carlos is basically part of Adobe, but he's not part of the Magento PWA Studio team. And he just went in and said like, well, Magento now has this GraphQL API. I'm familiar with React and Next.js. So what does it take to build a PWA from scratch? And of course, he was not trying to solve the puzzle of building a shop with all of those extensions out there. He just set to build maybe a simplistic shop with a minimum of extensions. But that's not the real point. The real point is basically that with zero knowledge of Magento, he just went in, played around with the GraphQL API, and built a front end. And also in an amount of time that is basically staggering compared to how much time is normally needed to build the traditional Luma front end for Magento. So I think actually the technology is different, but it's also the expectations that is different. Too many times people are still expecting that in the future a headless storefront is going to be based upon extensions and that you're simply clicking everything together and then it suddenly works. But I think the reality is that with headless, as a developer, you can choose which technology is better for you. In favor of that technology, you're dropping then the support of extensions. Because, well, if you're sticking with an old front end that is also adding a lot of extensions, and all of those extensions are flawed, leading into bug fixing, endless bug fixing, maybe you're spending more time than if you're building it from scratch instead. And that's kind of like the new thinking. What if we're not using Magento for its extensions, but we're using Magento for its core and its flexible architecture. And what if we are filling in the front-end gaps in the way that we prefer to? It's a totally different mindset.
Yeah, and I agree with that 100%. I think that the developers have to look at it in a way that works for them, and that technology has to be able to also work for the client. Let's look back. Let's dive back into PWA Studio. Let's look from an agency point of view. We've talked specifically about developers, but a lot of times in a bigger agency, the developers don't necessarily have all the flexibility to just choose something that they could. And let's just say, as an agency, the boss says, "Hey, we're all getting on board on PWA Studio. Let's make this happen." From your training, from the training point of view, how would you approach an agency in making sure they have a team that's ready to develop on PWA Studio?
Yeah. Well, so maybe to comment upon those managers that think like, well, with a little bit of focus, we can just make PW Studio happen and just train the whole developer team, and then there we go. Just remember also how much time it is going to take to convert a developer with no experience into an experienced Magento developer. It's going to take some time. And from a training perspective, or as an honest trainer, I should say that only training is not going to help you there. So I've been in there actually trying to help developers get started with Magento, but also get started with PWA Studio. And it's not only about training, but it's also about experience. So maybe if you're picking up on the challenge to do something with PWA Studio, you have to realize that the expertise is not just Magento, but it's actually React. And what you want to have is always at least one strong tech lead in the team that is experienced then with, well, the chosen technology, well, in this case, React. So you need to have a React lead developer. And surprise, it's pretty hard to convert the current Magento lead developer suddenly into a React lead developer because it's a different job. It's a different technology. And I'm personally also unable to pretend, for instance, that I'm a Python lead developer or something because I don't have the relevant experience in there. So either you wait for 4 or 5 years before your Magento lead developer becomes a React lead developer, or you need to hire somebody new. And that's kind of like also the difficulty. If none of your developers have any experience with React, then it's going to be really hard to get up to that skill level with already the first project. It's either that you need to start slowly by not starting with PWA Studio right away, but just starting with smaller projects. Let's talk about that maybe in a bit as well. But basically side projects, either playing around with React just a little bit, or just doing real projects, but outside of the scope of Magento and PWA Studio. Or you need to have that knowledge already in there by hiring the right people.
Okay, so if an agency has a really good React developer, would a somewhat knowledgeable JavaScript developer be able to take training and get up to speed with a good lead that would help them guide them through some of that process?
Yeah, I think that would be the right combination. So if there's a strong lead that knows his way around the React architecture, knows how to deal with the single state of truth or the single source of truth, and basics like how to communicate with GraphQL in a solid way, but also how to set up things like Redux and the context API without making a mess with all of that. Then basically the harder stuff is guaranteed. And then the next question would be what opportunities there for from the React perspective, the junior developers, right? So you could have really experienced developers with Magento, but once they start with React, they're again back to junior. But I think actually junior developers can make React a success pretty fast. Because I also believe that thanks to the architecture of PWA Studio, you don't need to worry about the harder stuff that much anymore. PWA Studio is really trying to make it easier for newcomers to build their own components on top of the more complex architecture of PWA Studio. And then it's basically up to the developer to build components. And well, to build a React component is pretty easy. That's what you learn with the very first lesson when diving into React. And the only thing that you need to do is just not build 1 or 2 components, but they'll build about 4,000 of them. And then you're getting the hang of it. But usually I create a component within about 5 minutes or so with the right amount of logic and etc. And basically by practicing that a lot, slowly, basically all of those junior developers will slowly become senior as well. So yeah, and then training is a huge opportunity.
Yeah, okay. So just taking the small perspective of the merchant, because I think that there's some salesmanship around PWA Studio from Adobe itself. Yeah. I'm a merchant. I'm hearing, hey, PWA Studio is ready. You can get it launched out of the box. You go to your Magento agency. That agency doesn't have any Magento, or it doesn't have any trained React developers. And now suddenly the salesperson at the agency says, of course we'll do that. Yes, we're an Adobe agency. We can do this. And yes, Adobe's saying, yes, you can do this. And yeah. What is realistically, so there's this out of the box solution. How is a merchant to look at that? And then, or how is a merchant going to expect something to get done, and then the complexity and time it's going to take for some of those simpler things to get modified within the Vinia theme?
Yeah, but I think actually that's the difficulty, that if people are expecting that PWA Studio is an out-of-the-box solution that you could modify, then they're not getting the goal of PWA Studio. So simply just compare it to that you can go online and study a course on German, for instance, and then once you've done that course, go into the supermarket in Germany and try to order something at the I don't know, the vegetable department or something. Then most likely you're gonna feel like a retard or something in there because you don't have the full knowledge yet. So speaking German comes with actually going through the trouble of doing a lot of exercises, a lot of practices, and etc. And I think the same is true for PWA Studio. The difficulty there is that, again, the expectations need to be different. Often the claim was made that Magento 2 was also this out-of-the-box solution. You install it, you customize it a little bit, and there you have a shop. That's giving an expectation to a merchant that you could be done for, I don't know, like $1,000 or so, and then you have your own new brand shop. However, the reality is that actually the customization is the harder part. So apparently, just having that out-of-the-box theme, having that out-of-the-box installation is suggesting a lower cost, but that's not the real deal. The way that Magento is supposed to be saving money is because of the flexibility, and the same thing actually is true for PWA Studio. It's not that by clicking through a couple of settings, then voila, you have this Magento PWA out there. No, instead, if you're a React developer, you're realizing actually that you're going to build a lot of different React components. And React components are all about the UI, the look and feel, the web design part of an app. And that's supposed to be easy. And if you're finding that easy because you're a React developer, then you're actually going to find PWA Studio pretty customizable. However, if you're expecting actually that you become a React developer by playing around with PWA Studio, then you're in it for the wrong reason.
Right. So I think what you're saying, if we look even back at Luma, if you want Luma out of the box, it would work. It comes and looks just like the Luma default theme. And if you're going to expect the same thing out of PWA Studio, you're going to get the same thing.
Yeah. And the difficulty there is that Luma was never intended to be the parent theme of everything else. I remember still actually talking with a couple of lead developers of Magento that once Luma was developed, that they thought actually that the community would pick up and come up with other skeleton themes, and some of them did, right? So Snowdog picked up on it, came up with a Snowdog theme. And what the Magento core team expected was that the whole community got started with different front ends, different JavaScript frameworks, different CSS and HTML strategies. But we didn't. That's the difficulty. We all expected actually that Magento was going to solve that issue with the front end, that they were going to supply us a front end, so that you only needed to worry about the back end a little bit, click, and there you had your own customized shop. Well, and I think actually that with Magento PWA Studio, they're trying to do the same thing again, but now making it a little bit more clear. PWA Studio is not the PWA, no, it's the studio part.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I think too, looking back at some of the other themes that have been out there, if you bought an off-the-shelf theme, typically the customer would ask for so many changes that it would have been easier to use the blank theme and do those modifications anyways.
Yeah, so it's kind of like that we're stuck in that impression that by buying a theme or buying an extension and getting all of that stuff for free, theoretically for free, that we're lowering the costs. But then we're overseeing the fact that basically the Luma theme never got performant. You could spend hundreds of hours on trying to optimize it, and then you're still at the lighthouse score that is just pathetic. That basically we're so used to actually lowering the startup costs and then actually wasting the budget on troubleshooting issues, that now actually with PWA Studio it's totally the other way around. You're not supposed to get everything for free. No, you're getting actually just the bare bones minimum for free, but then you're going to build the stuff in React. So how awesome is it? You can build everything for yourself. And then as soon as things become a little bit more technical, more difficult, things like the card management, the state management in the React code base, instead of rewriting it or writing it from scratch yourself, those difficult parts as well, then at that moment, actually, PWA Studio is proving to be an added value. The technical functions are there, but if I'm looking at the Venya UI theme, and I start to explain that also during a class, what that UI theme is actually about and how the code is being organized and what kind of HTML, CSS standards are in there and how you could adopt that, then everyone that I'm explaining that is slowly coming to the realization like, oh, but I don't want to have that. I want to build something different. And that's kind of like the awesome thing about React. You're not supposed to be extending too much upon the work of somebody else. You know, you're supposed to be a web designer, looking at the graphical design, converting it into React, and finding that thing easy. The only thing that is more difficult is to connect that mock-up of a web design, converting it into an actual app. And that's basically where PWA Studio comes up with its internal workings. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to just go right back to what you said about Magento expected that the community would rally around and build some of their own themes. I think that Adobe is somewhat doing the same thing with PWA Studio in the sense that they need to sponsor more, or they need to push more, or they need to show how developers are going to be using this. I kind of feel like they built it and then they said, okay, use it, but there isn't a lot of behind I don't know how to say this, but there isn't a lot that says, oh, this is something as an agency you need to use, and here's how Adobe is going to get behind you to make sure that some of these clients happen.
Yeah, so that's where I come up with my secret theory. And here it is in public. So what if this is all intentional? What if Adobe, by intention, is spending time on making sure that PWA Studio is developed and made more mature every day? What if the GraphQL API is also promoted is also made mature every day with every release? But what if they don't really want to advocate that story under the agencies that don't get it? Then actually those agencies might be confronted with a new technology that they're not getting, and they're finding it harder to make the right decisions in there. So apparently they're getting used to that picture where Adobe is developing some technologies, and some of those technologies might be adoptable, but some others are not. So instead, maybe the community comes up with a better alternative instead. So for me, PWA Studio, if you're a React developer, you're getting it. If you're developing already React applications for other purposes, then actually PWA Studio is just peanuts. But if you're a Magento developer stuck with that idea that Magento is going to take care of your backend and front end, then you're being surprised.
Yeah, okay. I see.
And in that story, I see actually Adobe almost by intent, not spending too much time on those developers that are so eager for Magento to hear like, oh, but here's extensibility of PWA Studio. Here's all of the marketplace extensions that are compatible with PWA Studio. That story is actually slowly developing, but so slow as if they wanted to be slow. For me, the secret ingredient is also that there's actually more front ends out there than just PWA Studio.
Yeah, no. So let's move into that right now. So there isn't just PWA Studio for Magento. In fact, theoretically you could take PWA Studio and bolt that onto BigCommerce if you'd like to.
Yeah. Well, and I think actually PWA Studio, so the reality is still that you're connecting to GraphQL, and GraphQL is specific for Magento. So the GraphQL calls that are supported by Magento are different than the ones supported by BigCommerce. So therefore, it's a little bit more difficult to use the sources of PWA Studio, use it for BigCommerce or others. But the main point is actually that it's a headless technology. You're trying to separate the front end from the back end. And if you're choosing Venya, you're actually committing yourself to become dependent upon the backend provider, which is Magento. But if you're building your own React component library, and that component library is including all of the visual aspects of how to display a shopping cart, how to display the checkout, how to display product pages, and everything that is part of your graphical design, part of your company representation is actually fit into a React UI component library, then actually that UI component library is totally reusable between BigCommerce, Shopify, Magento, and etc. And that's kind of like the real purpose of going headless.
Tell me, who is there anybody out there that's doing this well right now? Like Vue Storefront, is that a solution that works, or is there a solution out there that works in that case?
Yeah, so the Venya theme is actually based upon a Venya concept theme and then the Venya UI component library. But I would say that the UI component library of Venya, so PWA Studio, is really tightly connected to Magento. But Vue Storefront is actually doing such a thing. They've developed their own Storefront UI component library, and Storefront UI is basically there for React and Vue. So they're not supporting any just Vue Storefront anymore, but they're also supporting React-based strategies. And that Storefront UI is basically just hooking into a deeper logic of, well, the architecture of your PWA, again, written in React or Vue. And then again, that thing is connecting to a so-called connector. And that connector is there for BigCommerce, Shopify, Magento, and etc.
Okay.
So through their architecture, they've already disconnected kind of like the front end and the back end, but they're also supplying a storefront UI component library that you could even use without using Vue Storefront.
And I've heard of some of these solutions that you have to go through their SaaS connector. Is that the case with some of them, or are some of them standalone?
Yeah, so the difficulty with Vue Storefront is that Vue Storefront 1 requires a node middleware layer. So that's basically a required element for Vue Storefront 1. Vue Storefront Next is actually underway, and then their architecture allows you to disconnect from that middleware in between. So theoretically, then you don't necessarily need Node on a production environment, but actually you do. And I'm going to explain that in a moment. But basically, there's less necessity in their future architecture to actually have that node middleware layer in between. They also enforced Elasticsearch in the past. Well, they let go of that. Instead, Magento 2.4 is just enforcing us to use Elasticsearch. So we're back to square one. I think the main awesomeness with Vue Storefront is that they're basing their architecture upon Nuxt.js, and Nuxt.js is kind of like with React Next.js. So it's a framework built on top of the language like React or Vue. And in the case of Vue, it's Nuxt, and Vue Storefront is making use of that architecture. And through that architecture of Nuxt, they're making it all possible to switch from one backend system to another, to switch theoretically from Magento to Shopify or back again.
So tell me, if I'm a developer and I am interested in learning a language like Vue or React, and I have some experience with JavaScript, what would I be looking for to start? Like, let's just say I came to Urio, and I would like to learn something, and I'm not really sure, should I learn React? Should I learn Vue? And I would like to be somewhat flexible. I'd like to be able to do Magento and BigCommerce and whatever other front ends are out there for other back-end solutions. Yeah. What, as a developer, would I come to you or what would you recommend they do?
So yeah, my recommendation is, again, it's really hard to sell my trainings this way, but my recommendation is basically to get started with Vue and React, but not necessarily through training. Well, through training you can still do that, and some agencies actually come up to me and say, like, can we spend a day together with you on Vue? Can we spend another day together with you on React? But theoretically, also yet another day on yet another JavaScript framework, things like Alpine.js. And then afterwards, trying to make that decision, like which one is better. Because if you don't know about Vue and you don't know about React, you're only going to depend upon the sales talks of others to recommend you this or that. And then the reality is also that all of the Vue developers are going to recommend you Vue. All of the React developers are going to recommend you React. And it's hard to do that. So actually, what I realize is actually that a lot of developers always start on with developing in college. They have some kind of education level. And during that education, they just encounter all of the different technologies. So they start playing with Ruby, JavaScript, PHP, Java, C++, and then they make a choice like, oh, but I prefer this one instead of the other one. I think that's the same for choosing between Vue and React as well. It's just depending upon what kind of person you are, which one you're going to favor more. Yeah, it's going to be more difficult.
It depends on the developer too, and if they're working for an agency and they're getting paid to learn something, that also plays a big part in it.
Yeah, but maybe that's a good comparison as well. So if you're having an agency, and out of the 10 Magento developers, 9 hate JavaScript, in principle, and they don't want to get going with JavaScript in the first place, then PWA Studio is going to be a pretty much of a challenge. But likewise, if Vue Storefront. However, if you have a team of 10 developers and you can separate them between 4 backend developers and 6 front-end developers, and those front-end developers are actually playing around with multiple different technologies, so that they can all say like, oh, but I've done a couple of lessons with Vue, and I've once built this simple React app. Then you can ask them basically which one do you prefer and which one do you want to focus upon. And then also, because some people are enthusiastic about, for instance, React, then it becomes a little bit easier for the others to join as well. But if you don't have any experience in the agency with Vue and React at all, I don't know what to do. However, there's a solution still.
Tell me the solution. I can see that it's coming out of you.
You've heard about the solution as well, which is Hyva.
Oh, but okay. Before we get into Hyva or Hyva,
yeah.
I want to just let's close out the PWA talk. And actually, we don't have much time left today. But if you're going to give some actionable advice to an agency about a solution that is going to go on top of Magento, what would you give them right now? You got to tell me 1 minute.
Yeah, then I would say make an educated choice. An educated choice means that you need to know your stuff before making that choice. And if you don't know about React and you don't know about Vue, and if all of the developers actually say like, well, I've never tried it out, try it out today. And that's basically also where either learning time needs to be part of the solution, so that you're dedicating maybe half a day a week or a couple of hours in the week per developer, so that they just can play around with new technology and find more about it. Or maybe it's even up to reading documentation on how to use Knockout, but some kind of knowledge advancements, so that basically people can get that knowledge in there. And then try to push all of those experiments, all of those different learnings into a certain direction. Basically say like, well, forget about playing around with Knockout. Try to play around with Vue and React a little bit more. And then after 2 months or so, please come back to me and let me know what you found out. But just by jumping on board and saying like, oh, but we're going to use React, then you're just as silly as that you're saying like, oh, but let's build everything based upon Luma, only to find out that basically there's so many horrible things going on in there. So yeah.
All right. So I know I gave you a minute, but next time I'm going to give you 30 seconds on this one. As a developer, my agency is asking me to learn some kind of PWA solution that will go on top of Magento. What should I be telling my boss that I need and would like to do? Let's just say I have an opinion about Vue or React, either one. How should I present that to my boss? And you've given us some times already, but what is some good thing, or what are good 3 points that a developer could give his boss that says, this is what I need to get started. This is the time I need.
Yeah. So first of all, I need time to dive into things. That's number one, because otherwise it's hopeless. But also make sure that time is just measured wisely, so that you're taking enough time to get adjusted to technology, even though maybe you're not going to use that technology on the long run. And that's where I would say that every agency nowadays, especially on the front end, also needs to be doing something on the educational level, because the front end story is just changing so quickly. So if your developers don't have any knowledge about Node, make sure that they know about Node, even though you're not going to use it at the first project right away. So you need to proactively invest basically into all of that. And well, again, yeah, the topic of today was training. So obviously training is one thing, but training through classroom trainings is one thing, but just educating yourself is totally fine for me as well. but you need to invest that time to get started with it. I'm not sure if those were 3 points, but kind of.
I'm going to add one thing that as a let's just say as a boss, what I want to see is something that what you've learned out of that. I think that what I've experienced over time, over the last 10 years, are a developer saying, oh, I'm going to dive into this. Let's just say I'm going to dive into Selenium. I'm going to learn everything I'm going to do about Selenium. Great, that's super, good, do it. And then suddenly they say, okay, I've learned it. So, yeah. But and I know there's a different mindset from a developer. What a boss wants to see is something that you've learned. So I know that when you get a lot of agencies or a lot of companies now are asking you to do some kind of code, kind of little mini project. And I've heard of agencies asking for a full day project up to a week project just to try to apply for a job. I don't think it's unreasonable for a boss to say, I want to see something out of this, as simple as it is. And I guess that goes both ways. A developer should give the boss something that is something they can see, that shows what they've learned. And then the boss should be able to say, oh, I've seen this. Now let's see what we can do next with it.
Yeah. Well, and then I'm going to stretch the time a little bit longer. This is also where my theory of hybrid front ends comes up as well. So within a Luma project, you can still integrate a Vue component or a React component, just to also deliver actually practical functionality. So the number of use cases or where agencies have built their own product configurator in Vue or React, or have built part or the total of the checkout into React and Vue as well, is actually just staggering at this moment. There's so many agencies doing that. There's also so many agencies that are not open sourcing all of those solutions, but that's also because they're not proud of it. But that maybe shows also that all of those developers just at least got going with that new technology, delivered also a project where the customer actually benefited from that project. But maybe the fact that it's not being open source is also showing that it's not the best of examples. But who cares? That's the learning exercise. That's at least getting us into the right direction.
Okay, I'm going to take that as a segue then, because I love that example of doing the hybrid model. And let's just pretend that there's a theme out there that everybody's getting behind right now. And it's a theme that everybody pronounces in a different way. Hyva. And in fact, I just did an interview with Tom Robertshaw. He had another pronunciation. So I feel like I'm going to have to somehow catalog all these ways of saying it. But I love that idea of doing a hybrid solution, that we could have part of this solution in this aspect and part of this solution in a different aspect. Well, so let's talk about Hyva. Hyva, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's finish off with Hyva. I'm excited about it. I know I think Willem is going to be on the show next week. So I'm excited to talk to him about it. I want to key in on the open source part of this, because we're being asked right now by a client to build out all the B2B front end items. And do we wait for Hyva to do that? And then is that included in the license cost? And I know that there's work being done for Page Builder and things like that. There's all kinds of things that open sourcing this would help. And maybe we have to have some separate solutions that are open sourced.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, I would say that Hyva is already open source. I'm not sure about the technicalities of the license, but I'm almost betting that the license itself is an open source license. As in, if you get access to the source code, then actually the license is just allowing you to look into the source code, to modify the source code, to use it in the way that you see fit. But it's just that to get access to the license, you need to have, I'm not sure how it's being called at this moment, but it's called a Hyva license. But it's kind of like a subscription to get part of the cool gang or something. And I think actually that's worth to take note of, that at this moment there's actually already plenty of developers, or at least some Hyva developers that are actually diving into the B2B modules. I'm not sure about the state, but I do know that work is in progress already. And everything that is being developed there by those developers is being fed back into the Hyva project, so that it's incorporated in that bundle of all of those different modules out there. I think it's more like that the reality of Hyva is that it's choosing to be a paid program for a simple reason. That actually Adobe, or I should scratch that, Magento has always been a paid program as well. Except for that there was also an open source version, and that so many people chose for that open source version that sometimes we forgot that there was also this commerce edition out there as well, where the fees were sometimes just ridiculous as well. Or from my perspective, because I was always an open source, I'm still an open source user. And with Hyva, they just decided like, well, if we're giving it away right now, then actually we're unable to finish it off in the way that we need to. So either it's really a closed beta where only those people that are invited are actually getting access, or well, you simply pay a certain fee, and which is at this moment still €1,000. And the funny thing is, like, I'm still inclined to actually write up a blog post specifically about that €1,000, because it's not free. True. It's also not send me a postcard program or buy me a beer. It's actually €1,000, which is a hefty sum for a lot of different developers out there. Because if you compare this to a month salary of a developer in India, it's kind of staggering, right? However, the question is, if there's a Luma-based project and you're going to you're being asked by the client to increase the Lighthouse score, how many hours are you going to invest to crank up that performance? Well, I believe that easily you can spend about 100 hours of doing so without actually getting up to 100%. And that 100 hours, well, let's just say that you're getting paid €10 per hour, right?
Yeah, I would argue that it would be more than 100 hours. So I totally see where you're going here.
Yeah.
And I'm just making the argument, but I also see that Willem and Willem has to. It's a commercial venture, and they have to make money. So I do totally get it.
But it's always kind of like a difficulty, and that's again back to the old trouble that we actually have in the Magento community. We think that we get everything for free, but that's not true. If it would be for free, then we would be building Magento shops for less than €100. But instead, actually, it's us making money out of all of those customizations. And now we can actually just spend time on a much more fun technology like React, but also like Hyva and like Vue. It's just up to us to choose which one we prefer best. And then suddenly we complain about Hyva asking just a small percentage of the total of the project. It's just a little bit like comparing apples and pears. Open source was never free in the beginning. It's about free speech, not about free beer. That's the comparison always to make there. And I think that's totally true about Hyva as well. At least Hyva is not pretending to be anything different. And that's the nice thing.
Yeah, I just wanted to just say that nobody in English says apples and pears. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
You say apples and bananas?
You're lucky I didn't just stop this podcast right now. It's apples and oranges. Everybody knows that. Yeah. Jeez.
Or apples and
we don't say wooden clogs and stroopwafels.
Well, we do those comparisons. Stroopwafel shoes, etc.
All right, so let's close it out for today. I do think that we have some interesting topics to continue to bring up, And I would propose that you and I go on and do like let's do a live LinkedIn video or whatever thing, whatever they call it, live LinkedIn.
Live thing, LinkedIn.
Yeah,
thing.
That's exactly what it's called. I can't wait for the transcript to go through this. And I think that let's start really trying to get some developers involved. And I would say let's do it in the Indian time, so we'll get a lot of Indian developers involved as well, because I think there's a lot of people interested in this topic.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
and it would be good to see some interest, or not interest, but just get some perspective what other people are thinking. About this. And I think from a developer, what I'm really interested in is learning from a developer point of view, because I know you're giving some good advice and some good feedback on this topic. And I know I'm coming from sort of the agency leadership side and honestly, I'm coming from the sales side. You mentioned about open source and Magento, the Magento enterprise licensing back in the day. And for me, everything was about making sure that the Magento salespeople were happy. So, I'm seeing it from the other side. It would be great to see what the real-time feedback of what a lot of these developers are going through on this, and even do a short Q&A so we can get some feedback on it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, look forward to that, to this linked thing in
LinkedIn thing
live,
whatever.
Live, yeah.
All right, good. Yeah,
awesome.
I want to apologize for my new light in my room. I'm testing my portable solution for doing videos on the road. I'm actually in the office today, and I'm sitting in one of these little phone booth things that we have with my new light wand thingy with fun aspects of party.
What was it called? Let me just look it up.
It's called
a straight jacket.
Yes, exactly. You got it.
That's it. Yeah, okay.
Great. Well,
awesome.
It's been a pleasure to have you again here today. You were in episode number 1, and I think this is going to be like episode, I don't know, it might be on episode 25 already.
42 or something?
Yeah, not 42, but yeah.
Almost getting there. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So don't mention too much next week my name, because Willem was pissed off at me when I started to promote Hyva, and then I suddenly started to promote PW Studio again, and then I started to promote Hyva again. So, but I hope that's going to be productive as well together with him.
Yeah, absolutely, great. Yeah,
awesome. Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Have a good day. Bye.
Magento Creative, partnering with the client to help fulfill their strategic growth, serving the world as an Adobe Gold partner and BigCommerce Elite partner. Magento, the code of commerce. This episode has been sponsored by the partner of choice for technology, infrastructure, and enterprise-level digital solutions, an AWS Select Consulting partner, eWay Corporation, Forward Together. Thank you again for listening. My name is Brent Peterson, and it has been my pleasure to be your host today. Please rate and subscribe to Talk Commerce. New shows out every week.